Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. You can check out the website, geektherapyradio.com. You can email me, johnny@geektherapyradio.com. That's JOHNNY @geektherapyradio.com. Geek Therapy Radio Podcast is my handle. I know you're listening to this on the radio, so you're not listening to the podcast version if you're listening to it on the broadcast radio. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all that good stuff, even TikTok, I do some videos now. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, and that's me. Make sure you're looking for the red, white, and black color scheme. All right, Plug-a-roonies over with for the first segment. I wanted to at least talk this first segment about EVs, but coming up in the show, I do want to talk about some handheld gaming news. Not news necessarily, but I have a few devices I'd like to talk to you about that came out recently, including the 8BitDo Lite 2 that I'm holding up to the camera right now. Yes, I am recording this. It is on my Panasonic Lumix S5. I'm recording it at 4K 24 frames per second, which means the autofocus ain't gonna be that great. You know, Lumix cameras, Panasonic Lumix cameras aren't necessarily known for their spectacular autofocus, and the smaller frame rate you operate at, the worse the autofocus is. So the autofocus is pretty good at 60 frames a second. It's not so good at 24 frames a second, which is how I'm recording right now, because less frames means less data, less focus data to work with, and so that is that. Panasonic cameras, by the way, little side note before we move on to EVs and such, they use, what is it, pixel autofocus or contrast based autofocus. They don't have all the little IR sensors and things that Sony's and Canon's do for their pixel autofocus and their eye tracking autofocus. Technically, Panasonic does have some sort of eye tracking autofocus. It focuses on human faces. There are algorithms in there, but since it doesn't have the extra sensors that Sony's do and that Canon's do, the autofocus, Panasonic is not known for their stellar autofocus. It works, but as you can see from the video, if you watch this on YouTube, and I will upload this to YouTube, autofocus ain't that great. So I'm testing it out right now. I'm holding up the little controller, the 8BitDo Lite 2 to the camera. We'll see if it actually focuses on it or how fast it focuses. But anyways, first segment, I want to talk a little bit about EVs. I don't want to beat the dead horse too much. There are just kind of these instances that happen to me during the weeks between shows, during the week between shows, during the days between shows that happen all the time that still tells me the odds are, if you're listening to this broadcast on this station in particular, which there's nothing wrong with being conservative, but is a particularly biased agenda part of the radio cluster. Again, nothing wrong with that. I'm not throwing shade on any of my other hosts on the station at all. I'm just saying there seems to be this pervasive misunderstanding of what EVs are and aren't among a certain demographic. And I don't blame you, the listener, if you lean one way or the other for not knowing everything there is to know about EVs, especially if you get all your news and all your information about EVs by listening to radio stations like this one. You know some things, but you just plan on knowing. Just assume that you don't know 90% of what there is to know. What you know is maybe 5-10% facts about EVs, but you don't know 90% of it. And I'll say case in point right here. And I don't mean to insult everybody listening. The podcast listener is a different demographic than the broadcast listener. So I'm not saying that blanket statement everybody doesn't know 90% of what there is to know about EVs, but if you're just listening to the radio, if you're just getting your information from the hosts on this station and sister stations, there's an agenda there that's not geared towards being factual. It's geared towards being emotional and a little bit misleading. And so I don't blame you. Case in point, the most common question I get from my conservative friends and family, which I love them to death. There's nothing wrong with what they believe. It's, of course, they are free to believe whatever they want to believe and vote however they want to vote. But among that demographic, I notice that the most common question I get is this: how long does it take to charge? which is a loaded question. And I answer it as such. I say, well, that's a loaded question because the reality is that for 99% of people, 99% of the time, you're only actually recharging about 30 or 20 miles a day. You're not getting the tank down to zero, so to speak, the battery down to zero and then charging it all the way back up. 99% of the time, all you're really doing is charging back up those 20 or 30 miles from the average daily commute. And that happens overnight, few hours, even on a standard 110 volt outlet, the same outlet you plug your smartphone into, the same outlet you plug your microwave into, the same outlet you plug your TV into. That's what charges the car, and it charges back to full while you're watching the Astros, while you're drinking beer, while you're spending time with your family, while you're doing whatever you need to do. You come back out the next morning and it has long since recuperated those 20 or 30 miles you've run down from the previous day. So the question comes, the misunderstanding comes from our conditioning. And it took me a while to understand this too before I started driving an EV. I have an EV for daily driving. I still have my V8 Audi S5 6-speed manual transmission, 3 pedals as God intended. I still have my 1983 DeLorean. We still have my wife's 2015 Jetta, which is automatic. So I have plenty of ICE vehicles. I have plenty of gasoline powered vehicles, including a nice naturally aspirated small block V8. It's glorious. But I have had the EV for almost 2 years now, and there's things that you realize that you can only understand, that you only come to realize after driving it, after spending a lot of time with it. So that question, how long does it take to charge? It comes from conditioning from driving gas vehicles our whole life, where what you do with the gas vehicle typically is you fill up with gas once a week, once every 2 weeks, whatever, no matter, depends on what kind of car you're driving. You basically roll into the gas station with 20 or 30 miles left on the tank, and then you're filling the tank back up to get your full tank again. And that only takes a few minutes, but that's not how EVs operate. You don't drive an EV down to zero every single day and then fill it up once every week or two. That's not how it works. And that's where the kind of misconceptions come, and that's where the questions come, and how long does it take to charge? I want to talk about this a little bit in the next segment to fully clarify this. We'll wrap up this thought here in a minute. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. I want to wrap up real quick what I was talking about in the first segment about one of the most common questions I get when I roll up to my conservative friends and family's houses. And I'm not saying that I'm not conservative. Actually, I am right smack dab in the middle, listening to reason and logic from both sides, or the lack of reason and logic from both sides. It's very lonely being out in no man's land, where you basically have to take heat from both sides. You have to you either entrench left or you entrench right, and there seems to be no middle ground. But common sense and just being reasonable and kind of saying, oh, well, the left has a good point here, the right has a good point here, the left is ridiculous here, the right is ridiculous here, and me and some people like me are right in the middle, just trying to sort it all out and be rational, reasonable thinkers. It's a tough spot to be in sometimes. Applying rational reasoning to EVs is one of those things that kind of you see the irrationality and the lack of understanding on both sides regularly. There's lack of understanding of what EVs are and aren't on the left. Of course, also there's big time lack of understanding of what EVs are and aren't on the right, big time as well. So the most common question I get from my right-leaning, proud, flag-waving conservative friends and family is, how long does it take to charge? To recap from the last segment, all you're really doing in an EV 99% of the time every day is recouping the miles from the day. And for most people, that's 20 or 30 miles, maybe 50 miles tops, what you've driven on the average commute. So you're topping it up every day. Every day you go out to your driveway, even charging on a standard 110 volt outlet, the same you use for your smartphone, the same you use for your TVs and refrigerators and things. Every time you come out to the driveway the next morning, it's full. You have the full range. The full range depends on what model EV you have. For my 2017 Chevy Bolt, it ranges between 230 miles, 260 miles every single day, full tank. Every single day you can go 200, 230, 260 miles on the charge of the EV. Every day. That's the range you got from the beginning. So how long does it take to charge? You're recharging 20 to 50 miles tops. That happens while you're watching the Astros, while you're watching the Texans, if you plugged in on a Sunday or something like that. It's basically topping up while you're just resting. Now, the real answer to that is it probably, on a standard 110 outlet, which is trickle charging, probably takes 6, 7, 8 hours probably to top it up every night just while you're sleeping. Let's say you get home around 6 p.m. and then let's say you leave fairly early for work the next day, 6 a.m. That's 12 hours that you're plugged in the whole time. That's way more than enough time to keep your EV charged up. The question comes from conditioning that we've all experienced driving gasoline vehicles. How long does it take to charge? Because the conditioning that we've gotten into, the routine we understand with gasoline vehicles is that, yes, you don't top it up every day. What you do with a gasoline vehicle is you wait till the gas light comes on and then you go to the gas station and refill it. So once a week, once every couple weeks, depending on the efficiency of your vehicle. That's just what we, and me included, have just been conditioned into. You deplete the whole tank and then you refill it again. But that's not what you do with an EV. Every day you plug it in and it trickle charges and you have a full tank, so to speak, quote unquote, every single morning when you go out. Now, let's say you do roll into your driveway with 5 miles left on the charge, or your little indicator flashing 0 miles, saying you're basically, we don't know how much range you have, but charge it up. On a standard 110 outlet, you have to basically do a very simple bit of math. You're basically charging on a 110 volt outlet, let's just say at about 900 or 1,000 watts. So a kilowatt an hour, unless you're doing it 12 amps or whatever your car can do it at, you're basically doing, let's just say, a kilowatt an hour. Now, if you have a 66 kilowatt hour battery in your car, in your EV, what is 66 divided by 1? So 66 kilowatts divided by 1 kilowatt of charging per hour, that's, the rough math is about 66 hours. So 2.5 days, thereabouts, a little bit more, maybe a little bit less to charge from 0. But that is on a standard 110 outlet. If you did the same thing, if you rolled into your driveway, 0 miles on your battery, on your 66 kilowatt hour battery, and you plug it into your dryer outlet, which is 220, 240, 250 volts, and you're charging it like 24 amps, you're basically charging at 5.5 kilowatts. So what is 66 divided by 5? Computer, what is 66 divided by 5?
66 divided by 5 is 13.2.
13.2 hours to go from dead to full at 5 kilowatts. Now, you can charge even faster than that. Some dryers and chargers will allow you to charge a little bit faster than that. You can go, in my car in particular, you can do like 7.2 kilowatts an hour. So let's do the math on that. Computer, what is 66 divided by 7.2?
66 divided by 7.2 is approximately 9.1667.
Okay, about 9 hours. Just with your house, just without redoing the wiring of your house. Just plugging your car, your EV, into your dryer outlet, you can charge in as little as 9 hours. And remember, to put this all into some context, you get home around 6 p.m. from work, even if you get home a little bit later from work, and then you leave the next morning at 6 a.m. at the, early, that's pretty early for a lot of people. That's still 12 hours. In the car, worst case scenario, at empty, pulling in, and you plug into your dryer outlet, you can charge it up in 9 hours. That's just my car. That's not even old EV tech, but that's kind of yesteryear's EV tech. That's what's called level 2 charging, plugging into a 220 or 240 volt outlet, which you already have in your house. You're charging from dead to full, again, while you're drinking Modelo's, while you're sipping on Shiners, while you're drinking a Bud Light, while you're barbecuing, while you're making some barbecue chicken, while you're cooking some pizza inside, while you're doing whatever, while you're enjoying your family, your car's out there with a magic gas fairy filling the tank while you're just enjoying yourself. There's no worry like, oh my gosh, I got to stop at the gas station before work tomorrow. Oh my goodness, I got to stop at the gas station on my way home from work tomorrow. There's none of that. And I'm not saying that that is the end all be all of like that you should go out and buy an EV. I'm not saying that at all. As a matter of fact, I'd say now is a terrible time to go out and buy an EV. If you think you're going to buy an EV to save money because electricity is at the moment technically cheaper to fill your car with than gasoline, it makes no sense to go out and buy a $60,000 electric vehicle if you can be lucky enough to get one for only $60,000. Makes no sense. You're not saving any money. The best way to save money on fueling costs is to drive the car you already own and pay for gas that's about $3 a gallon right now. That's just the dollars and cents of it. I just wanted to clarify some things, and I can see that I'm filling this segment up with it. So I was listening to another host on this station the other day who was test driving it was Michael Garfield, High Tech Texan, test driving the Ford F-150 Lightning, the EV Ford pickup truck. And I don't think he meant to do this, but what was left in the audience's mind when I was listening was he mentioned something like, when the 300 miles of range is gone, then you're hunting for a charging station. And it was basically it's talking about range anxiety and things like that. And that just that's what got me thinking. I was like, well, but you're never really depleting it fully. You're rarely, maybe 1% of the time you're in the position where you're like hunting for a charging station. That's not really how it goes. You just leave your driveway every day with the full 300 miles of range, and that's on the limited range model. Maybe that's the mid-range model. Either way, you're almost never hunting for a charger. And if you live in a metropolis like Houston, Texas, you are never that far from what's called a level 3 charger that will charge that Ford F-150 or your Tesla or whatever in like 45 minutes, 0 to full. Now you're thinking 45 minutes, you're standing there pumping. No, you're not standing there pumping for 45 minutes. This is all worst case scenario. You can head into Cracker Barrel, go do your shopping, do whatever you want. And when you come out, your car's full. And that is from 0 to full. 0 to full in that amount of time. And in a lunch break, your car is charged up. So anyways, there's just a lot of myths and mysteries about EVs and misunderstandings, but I'm going to move on to different subjects here coming up in the next episode. Next segment of Geek Therapy Radio, let's talk about video games and graphics cards. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I spent the last couple segments talking about EV myths and misunderstandings and realities of it. And so you want to listen to the podcast if you want to hear my thoughts on that. The first 2 segments, check out the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast player. So of course that's the iHeartRadio app. You can also listen to it on the speaker and Spotify and iTunes and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts or whatever you listen to podcasts. Type in Geek Therapy Radio podcast and you can check it out in your favorite podcasting platform. Same goes for other hosts on our iHeart Media channels. So anybody, Garf, High Tech Texan, please go listen to download his podcast, High Tech Texan Podcast, download in the iHeartRadio app and Spotify and all over the place. Go listen to all my fellow hosts on here. But just a recap for 20 seconds, if that. You are almost never in an EV hunting for a charger. That happens very, very, very rarely. And if you live in a heavily populated area like Houston, the 3rd or 4th, I think it sways back and forth sometimes, biggest city in the country, you're never that far away from a high capacity charger that'll charge your car at 150 kilowatts. Remember the math I talked about the last segment about my car has a 66 kilowatt hour battery or 66 kilowatt battery, and at home you charge on a 110 volt at 1 kilowatt. So you do the math, 66 divided by 1 is 66 hours. Charging with your dryer is up to 7.2 kilowatts. So 66 kilowatts divided by 7.2 kilowatts equals about 9 hours or so. On a level 3 charger, let's do the math on 150 kilowatts per hour to charge a 66 kilowatt hour battery pack. Computer, What is 66 divided by 150?
66 divided by 150 is 0.44.
0.44, so about 44 minutes to charge from 0 to empty in a full battery pack. Again, that's not you sitting there like at a gas station holding the handle, pumping electrons into your battery. That's you plugging it in and going out to eat at the restaurant across the way or doing your shopping or whatever, and you come back out and your thing is full. Same thing on road trips. If you're on a road trip and you have a long range EV like a Tesla or a Hyundai Ioniq 5 or something like that, the Ioniq 5s actually charge it up to 300 kilowatts an hour, which is all the shorter amount of time. Point is, long road trip, you're out stretching your legs anyway, you're kind of chilling out for 30 minutes or so, stopping for lunch, stopping to eat, stopping at Buc-ee's for whatever. You come back out, car's full again. Yes, pumping gas takes maybe 5 minutes, depending on how fast the pump is going. But you can stand there, and what do you do when you pump gas at a Buc-ee's or at a big gas station? You pump the gas, and then you get back in your car, and then you park in a spot somewhere so you can eat or do whatever you want to do. With an EV, you just kind of plug it in, then go about your business. When you come out, you're full again. So there's pros and cons. I will wrap up my thoughts on EVs by saying this, and I did not know I was going to talk so much about EVs on this podcast. Again, I'll wrap up by saying this. We are not at a point heading into 2023 where the average American driveway can afford to give up a gas vehicle. We are still very much in early adopter phase of electric vehicles. It's just like the turn of the century. Gas cars weren't extremely reliable. The infrastructure wasn't there. The gas stations and stuff wasn't there at the turn of the century. So farmers couldn't afford to give up their horses once they got their newfangled tractor or newfangled cars. The same thing is happening in 2023. EVs are the new tech. EVs are the new way. That's most likely where the future is going, but we are still early on. So the average American driveway, as much as I love EVs and as much as extreme right-leaning listeners might listen to what I'm saying today and think that I'm some sort of hippie liberal or something like that. No, we are not at the point where the average American driveway can run on only EV vehicles. You still need a gas vehicle in the average American driveway. But what happens is, what you'll see is that the gas vehicle collects a lot of dust. You have to stay on top of the maintenance and starting the engine a little bit more often because it can go weeks at a time between not using the gas vehicle. But you're still going to need that gas vehicle for the times that you need to have the convenience and the infrastructure that we've built up over the last 120 years for the gas vehicle. So we're not at a place yet where every American family can just have a couple of Teslas in their driveway and call it a day. We are not there yet. That 1% of the time it counts, you'll be calling an Uber or something. But right now, the best mix for an American driveway is an EV. I don't care how conservative you are. I don't care how extreme right-leaning you are. If you put an EV in your life, you will quickly, over the course of a few days, couple weeks, be like, there is nothing to fear here. This is actually really cool if you want to put your tail between your legs a little bit and admit to a lot of things. This is not the boogeyman that I've been led to believe it is. Similarly, an extreme left-leaning person who went all EVs, there's going to be times where they're like, you know what, maybe it was a little bit too early to get rid of the Prius. Maybe it was a little bit too early to get rid of my Toyota Corolla. Maybe we're not at the point yet where we can just do whatever we need to do on EVs. But the same person might make the argument, okay, when we don't need an EV, that's when we call Uber or something like that. I'm just saying, if you come to only experiencing something, do you get an understanding of something? And if you've never had an EV, you've never daily driven an EV, then you do not know 90% of the story. You know a fraction of the story. You know the hype, the sensationalism, the boogeyman, the fear that is instilled into you about EVs, but you don't know the reality of it because you haven't experienced the reality of it. Anyways, let's move on from all my hippy-dippy EV talk, and I'm only saying that for my radio listeners because, you know, podcast listeners might lean a little more center like me. I got podcast listeners from every demographic, and I love you. I spent an episode recently saying how much I love my right-leaning listeners because they are probably my most understanding demographic who listen to my show. Because there's things I talk about on here that go against the grain, that don't toe the line of this radio station cluster. And I appreciate the opportunity for the free speech. I appreciate coming at it from a more reasonable, rational point of view, which is completely lost on mainstream talk radio. MSTR is what I've called it. Mainstream talk radio. Guess what? If you're reaching millions or hundreds of millions of listeners a day, that's mainstream, buddy. That's mainstream. Mainstream talk radio, and I appreciate that I have the freedom of speech to be shoulder to shoulder with these titans of mainstream talk radio, and I'm sitting here saying, hey, EVs aren't as bad as you think they are. Get this liberal off the air. All right, let's move to gaming news. You know what I'm going to start with? I'm going to start with some graphics card stuff. No, I don't want to open up my calculator. My goodness gracious. Okay, I want to talk about graphics cards a little bit. So the RTX 4090, NVIDIA RTX 4090 recently announced, and we have all the pricing details for the RTX 4090 specifically. Right now, even more specificer, I'm looking at Zotac's offerings because EVGA isn't a thing anymore. Let's look at Zotac's offerings. They are offering the RTX 4090 from $1,600 up to $1,700. And the difference between $1,600 model, $1,650 model, and $1,700 model is literally 50 megahertz of boost. So the $1,600 model boosts up to 2520 megahertz. The $1,650 model boosts up to 2,535 megahertz, and the $1,700 model boosts up to 2,580 megahertz. So from 2,520 megahertz to 2,580 megahertz, or 2,520 megahertz to 2,580 megahertz. That's 50 megahertz of difference for $100. And mark my freaking words, you could manually overclock the $1,600 graphics card to go above 2,580 megahertz. There are some, and I talked about this in the last episode of Geek Therapy Radio, where we've been seeing these benchmarks, these kind of unconfirmed benchmarks, pre-release benchmarks of the RTX 4090 that you're seeing boost clocks just a tad over 3 gigahertz, just a tad over 3,000 megahertz. So what I would do if I was buying a new RTX 4090 for $1,600 or $1,700, I would buy the $1,600 model and just boost it, just manually overclock it if it was that big of a deal to me. The CUDA cores are the same. It's 16,380 CUDA cores across everything. It's the same amount of RAM, 24 gigabytes of GDDR6X RAM. It's all 21 gigabits per second and a 384-bit bus. It's all the same. It's just a difference in the factory boost clocks, and it's only a 50 megahertz difference across the 3 tiers. This is just from Zotac. The last thing I wanted to say about the RTX 4090 graphic cards is a while back, maybe on Twitter, I forget exactly where I said this, but I was like, yeah, $1,600, $1,700. That's more reasonable price than I expected. Make no mistake, that is still selling a kidney to get the latest and greatest graphics card. Where I was coming from when I made those comments was that we just came out of the crypto mining scourge, where people were spending over $3,000, $4,000 on a 3090. So when we've been conditioned like that over the past couple years, and then we see a brand new card for $1,700, that's way less than $3,000. It's just what we got used to. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, geektherapyradio.com, or just email me directly, Johnny, Johnnny, at geektherapyradio.com. And you can hit up all my socials and other media outlets. It's Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. Again, Geek Therapy Radio Podcast on everything. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter is a really good place to get at me. That's where I can respond almost instantly, is on Twitter. YouTube, what else did I mention? All the social medias, just type in Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, and that's me. Make sure you look for the red and white and black color scheme. That's how you definitely know it's me. Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, also in your favorite podcast player. Of course, we here at iHeartMedia love the iHeartRadio app, so go get it there if you want. But it's also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Podbean, Pocket, whatever you listen to podcasts with. Type in Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's me. All right, so just before, I'm talking about some handheld gaming and emulation stuff now, but let's move to some controllers. Just before I started recording this show, I received in the mail from Amazon, who said the package was lost, and they're like, we don't know where it is. And I got the box. It was covered in perfume or some sort of incense or something like that. It looked grody. But anyways, I have the latest 8BitDo Lite 2. I will hold it up to my camera for a extended period of time here so that my Panasonic Lumix S5 can focus on it, hopefully. This is the 8BitDo Lite 2. I call it 8BitDo, not 8BitDo, because it's Nintendo, not Nintendo. That's just my personal thoughts on it. Anyway, so here's the 8BitDo Lite 2. And here is the original, the first one, the 8BitDo Lite, or the first generation of Lite 1, however you want to discuss it. And I'm going to show you on the camera here the differences, and I'll describe it for my radio listeners and my podcast listeners who maybe aren't watching the video right now. So you can see the differences. We see that we have two analog sticks that are clickable. So you got that L3 and R3 going on. You see in the top that we have the shoulder buttons, which are digital. They're not analog shoulder buttons compared to the Lite 1, which has the shoulder buttons, but they're digital and they're laid out a little bit differently. The D-pad is also different. Look in the 8BitDo Lite 2 that the D-pad is smaller than on the first Lite. Now I want to talk about that D-pad for a little bit. Let's talk about the original 8BitDo Lite right here. The D-pads on here are exceptional. They are nice and clicky. I'm going to hold it up to the camera so you can hear or hold it up to the microphone so you can hear how clicky the D-pad is. That's me going around all four of the directions of the D-pads, nice and clicky. Now, listen to the D-pad, or don't listen to it, the lack of listening on the Lite 2. This is my main criticism, and really my only criticism of the Lite 2, because everything else feels awesome. It's so good in the hand, so good in the hand. As for a pocketable, portable device that works with your Nintendo Switch, your PC, your Android, your whatever, the form factor and the feel overall is awesome. Typical 8BitDo greatness. But the D-pad sucks. It's so bad. I mean, it functions in games, but listen to the clicky of the D-pad. That was me going over all four directions, or 8 directions technically, of the D-pad. Notice how you didn't hear anything? Yeah, it is not clicky. It is smaller and is not clicky. The membrane underneath it sucks, which means that it's not great for fighting games as opposed to the original Lite, which is amazing. Again, here's the clicks of the D-pad. You can fire off Hadoukens and Shoryukens and Street Fighter all day long, do the quarter circle, semicircle, full circle special moves with the original 8BitDo Lite all day long, and it's a mushy mess, and you're kind of, it's a gamble as to they're going to come out on the Lite 2, and it's such a shame. And I hope they update that in the next version of the Lite 2. Maybe they do the Lite 3 or just version 2 of the Lite 2. I know we're getting a little pedantic here. I hope they fix that membrane underneath the D-pad in the next one. I don't know why they can't just give it the bigger D-pad that's on the original Lite. I'm going to hold it to the camera again, see if you can see the difference in size of the D-pads. The one on the Lite 2 is smaller than the one on the original Lite, and it is not clicky, it is mushy, and it is bad. Which sucks, because every single other thing about this controller is amazing. The way it sits in the hand is amazing. Even if you have bigger hands like I do, I don't have the biggest hands in the world. It's so nice. It's so perfect in the hands, and we have the clickable analog sticks. It's wonderful. But the D-pad on it sucks. I really hope they update that. All right, moving on. What segment am I in? Is this the 4th segment already? My goodness, we are flying through this. Okay, so I've had my, switching gears to a different product, different company here, my Retroid Pocket. I've had my Retroid Pocket 2 Plus for a couple months now. I will hold it up to the camera right here. Hopefully my Lumix S5 will focus on it. That is the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. Now, just recently, I finally received my Retroid Pocket 3. There's been some controversy about this handheld emulator because of the screen. Fox on YouTube famously initially refused to review it because he got burned by the screen. Not burned, like physically burned, but he said there's quality control issues with the screen, and he doesn't know what customers are going to get, so he's not going to review it. He's not going to recommend people get it because he doesn't want to do a review of a good unit that they send him, and then Retroid Pocket 2 sends out orders that are terrible, and then that makes Fox looks bad, and that makes other reviewers look bad who said, yeah, get the Retroid Pocket 3 because it's great, and then they get their Retroid Pocket 3 in the screen's flickery nonsense mess. I just received my Pocket 3. I'm showing it here to the camera. It's phenomenal. The one I got is phenomenal. I ordered it late August. It finally got here early October, which is understandable. Remember, 6 to 8 weeks, allow 6 to 8 weeks for delivery. Our kids are never going to understand that. But this was one of those cases where it was like 6 to 8 weeks for delivery from Retroid. And I got it, and it's wonderful. It is wonderful. Let me turn it on here for the camera just to kind of show you the screen. It's going to be kind of bright. Let me get it to where it's maybe not so blown out. That's not too terribly bad. It's a little bit bright on the screen here, but the screen itself, I think 4.7 inches diagonal. It's a 16:9 aspect ratio. It's wonderful, and all the buttons are wonderful, and the sticks are wonderful, and the shoulders are wonderful, and the D-pad is wonderful. Everything about it is great. This is such a great device. The Retroid Pocket 2 Plus feels solid. Retroid Pocket 3 feels even solider. It feels premium. And you can watch reviews of this thing all over the place. Just go into YouTube and type in Retroid Pocket 3. And you'll get all these reviews of it. My initial review is that it is exceptional. It is the best bang for the buck handheld. The one I got was a 3 GB version, which costs like $120, $130. It is the best bang for the buck handheld emulator, pocket emulator that you can get right now. And I've had people on YouTube commenting, well, it's not the best handheld pocket because the, oh gosh, what is it? The Odin Lite, the Odin, yeah. The Odin is the Android version that has the Snapdragon 845 processor, and you're like, that's the best handheld going right now. But like, yeah, but that's like $300, or it's at least $100 more expensive. I think it's between $200 and $300. It is at least $100 more expensive than this, and this will run 90% of everything that the Odin will. So that's why this is the best bang for the buck. It's not the most powerful, but it is at least $100 cheaper than everything else, which makes it the best bang for the buck. I think that's it. Covered a lot of quick ground here in the podcast. I want you to know something. More than anything else, what I want you to understand, no matter where you lean politically, no matter your sexual orientation, no matter your religion, no matter what, anything. We can all disagree about anything we want, whatever. The point is, you are loved, and you are worthy of love. Let me repeat that. You are worthy of love. If you voted for Trump, or you voted for Biden, or you're gay, or straight, or anywhere on the spectrum, you are worthy of love, and you are loved. You're worthy of giving love, you're worthy of receiving love, and you're worthy of your own self-respect. Be strong, and I'll talk to you next time.